The private dining room at Auberge d'Orval had 32 seats, hand-stitched upholstery, and a chandelier that had been imported piece by piece from a chateau outside Lyon. It was the kind of room that made people feel important simply by being in it. Laurel Dempsey had been pouring water into crystal glasses in that room for 2 years, and she had learned, very early on, that the best thing she could do for her tips and her job was to disappear. That Tuesday evening in late October, she was doing exactly that. The table by the east window had been reserved under the name Beausoleil Acquisitions. 6 people, 3 from the acquiring side, 2 from the target company, and 1 woman who had arrived separately, said very little to the maitre d', and taken the chair at the end of the table with the quiet authority of someone who had never once in her life needed to announce herself. Her name was Park Ji-won. Laurel didn't know that yet. What she knew was that the woman was wearing a charcoal wool suit that probably cost more than Laurel's monthly rent, that she had ordered nothing but sparkling water, and that she had been watching the 2 men across from her with the careful, unreadable expression of someone listening to a language they did not yet trust, which, as it turned out, was exactly what was happening. "She's not going to budge on the equity split," said the man nearest the window. His name was Fletcher Gould, and he was the kind of man who wore cufflinks to a restaurant and made sure you noticed them. "We've been going around this for 40 minutes. She understands the numbers, she just doesn't like them." "She understands the numbers," said the other man. Laurel had heard someone call him Craig, "because we made sure she would. That's the whole point. The clause is buried in Schedule F. Her people won't catch it until the ink is dry." Fletcher smiled. It was not a pleasant smile. "And by then the Montreal office is ours." Laurel set down the water pitcher. She did it slowly, because her hands had gone very still. Park Ji-won, at the end of the table, was looking at the presentation tablet in front of her. She turned 1 page, then another. Her expression had not changed. Across from her, a younger man from her side of the table. A colleague, Laurel guessed, maybe an assistant, leaned over and said something quietly in Korean. Park Ji-won gave the smallest shake of her head. She could not follow the English conversation happening around her. That much was plain. Her interpreter had been delayed. Laurel had overheard that exchange when the party arrived, Fletcher Gould brushing it off with a performance of sympathy that did not reach his eyes. "Terrible luck. We can proceed, surely?" The documents speak for themselves, and Park Ji-won, too proud or too composed to show alarm, had nodded. Laurel refilled glasses she had already filled. She straightened a napkin that did not need straightening. She was buying herself time to think, which she had no business doing, because thinking was not her job here. Pouring water was her job. Keeping her distance was her job. The last server who had said something out of turn in this dining room had been walked out the same evening, and Laurel could not afford, in the most literal sense of that word, to be walked out of anywhere. Her mother's next round of treatment was in 3 weeks. The invoice was already sitting on the kitchen table at home, held down by a mug because the window in Laurel's apartment didn't quite seal. She moved to the far end of the room. The problem, she would later think, was that she had studied international business law for 3 years at McGill before the money ran out. She had written a seminar paper on asymmetric contract clauses in cross-border acquisitions. She knew exactly what Schedule F meant in that context, and she knew exactly what Montreal office is ours meant when said by a man who had just finished describing a clause the other party's legal team supposedly hadn't found. She also spoke Korean. Not perfectly. Her grandmother had been Korean-Canadian, and Laurel's fluency was the domestic, kitchen-table kind, not the boardroom kind, but enough. Enough to have understood what Park Ji-won's colleague had whispered to her a few minutes ago. Something feels wrong. Should we ask for more time? And enough to have heard Park Ji-won whisper back, "We cannot show uncertainty." Not here. Laurel stood by the service station with her hands flat on the counter. The linen cloth was cool under her palms. From where she stood, she could see Fletcher Gould pointing at something on his own tablet. His voice dropped low and collegial, performing the choreography of a fair negotiation for an audience of one woman who could not understand a word of what he was actually saying. The dining room was quiet around the edges. The other tables had cleared. It was just this party now, and the soft percussion of glassware, and the thing that Laurel had to decide. She thought about the manager, Thierry, not the one from the list. A different Thierry, her Thierry Nadeau, who had told her on her first day that the cardinal rule of Auberge d'Orval was that staff did not insert themselves into the business of guests. He had said it pleasantly. He had also meant it absolutely. She thought about her mother in the hospital bed 2 months ago, saying, "You're too smart to be pouring water, Laurel," and Laurel laughing it off because what else do you do? She thought about Fletcher Gould's smile. Then she picked up the water pitcher and walked back to the table. "Excuse me." She said it in English first, to the table at large, her voice the practiced neutral of someone asking if anyone needed anything. And then, before Fletcher could cut her off, she turned to Park Ji-won and said, in Korean, careful and deliberate, the words her grandmother had taught her at a kitchen table in Pointe Claire. "I'm sorry to interrupt. I work here. I am not involved in this meeting, but I believe there is something in this contract that you should see before you sign it." The table went silent, not the polite pause of a conversation briefly interrupted, the sudden, held silence of a room in which something has just changed. Park Ji-won looked at her. Her expression was still composed, but her eyes had sharpened in a way that had nothing to do with composure and everything to do with intelligence. She said, in Korean, "You speak Korean?" "A little," Laurel said. "My grandmother," a beat. Then Park Ji-won said, "What is it that you think I should see?" Fletcher Gould pushed back from the table. "I'm sorry. What is going on? What are you saying to her?" His voice had the particular texture of a man who is used to controlling rooms and has just felt one slip. He looked at Laurel with an expression that was trying to be amusement and landing somewhere considerably less confident. "This is highly irregular. You're a server." "I am," Laurel said, "and I'll accept whatever consequence comes from this." She looked at the tablet on the table in front of Park Ji-won. "May I?" Park Ji-won considered her for a moment. Then she slid the tablet across the table. Craig made a sound. Fletcher said, "Absolutely not." Laurel found Schedule F in 4 seconds. She had memorized the structure of this kind of document, the way you memorize the layout of a kitchen you've worked in for years. Not because you consciously mapped it, but because your hands knew before your mind caught up. She placed the tablet in front of Park Ji-won and pointed to the clause. Then she translated it, slowly, into the best Korean she had. She was not a professional interpreter. She fumbled 2 terms and had to circle back, but the meaning was plain. And Park Ji-won's face as she read it confirmed that the meaning was exactly as plain to her as Laurel had feared. The clause designated Beausoleil's Montreal division as a wholly owned subsidiary upon completion of the acquisition, with a governance override that transferred operational control to the acquiring company's board within 90 days. It was not listed in the summary document. It was not reflected in the equity split they had been negotiating for the past hour. It was, in effect, a mechanism by which Park Ji-won's company would spend the next 18 months legally untangling something it had not agreed to, in a jurisdiction 3,000 kilometers from home. Park Ji-won read it twice. Then she set the tablet down with the precise, unhurried movement of a woman deciding something. "This is outrageous," Fletcher said. He had stood up. Craig had also stood up. They were both standing now, which had the odd effect of making them look less authoritative rather than more. This server has no idea what she's talking about. This is a standard governance clause. It's completely Gold-si. Park Ji-won spoke in English for the first time all evening. Her accent was careful and exact. "Sit down, please." He sat. She said something to her colleague in Korean. He took out his phone and began. Laurel assumed calling someone, a lawyer, a translator, someone from the team who should have been here an hour ago. Park Ji-won folded her hands on the table and looked at Fletcher Gould with an expression that was not angry. It was something quieter than anger, more durable. "I would like to speak with your legal team tomorrow," she said. "Not tonight. Tonight is finished. Ms. Park, I assure you this is—" "Tonight," she repeated, "is finished." Fletcher Gould looked at Craig. Craig looked at the table. Neither of them looked at Laurel. She stepped back from the table and put the water pitcher on the service station and waited for Thierry Nadeau to appear because she was certain he would. He had probably been watching from the service corridor. She had probably, she thought, just lost the best-paying job she'd been able to find in 18 months of looking. She was thinking about that, running the numbers the way she always did, because there was comfort in specificity, in knowing exactly how bad something was, when she heard the sound of the guests from Beausoleil Acquisitions beginning to collect their things. Low, tight voices, the particular embarrassment of men who have been caught doing something they'd been certain no one would catch. The main party left without looking at her. Park Ji-won did not leave with them. She stayed at the table. Her colleague was still on the phone, pacing quietly near the window. She sat with her sparkling water and waited, and when Laurel came to clear the remaining glasses because she didn't know what else to do, so she did her job, Park Ji-won spoke. "Sit," she said. Then more gently, "Please." Laurel sat. It felt absurd, sitting at this table in her server's apron, but Park Ji-won was not looking at her with anything that resembled condescension. She was looking at her the way someone looks at an unexpected answer to a question they'd stopped expecting an answer to. "You're Korean," Park Ji-won said. "Where did you learn?" "My grandmother. She came to Montreal in the late 60s. We used to cook together." Laurel paused. "It's not formal. I'm sorry if any of the terms—" "No," Park Ji-won shook her head slightly. "You translated the governance clause correctly. I checked it myself as you spoke." She looked at Laurel for a moment. "You knew what it was before you translated it." It wasn't a question. Laurel answered it anyway. "I studied business law. 3 years. I had to leave before I finished my degree." "Why?" The directness of the question was not unkind. It was just direct. "My mother got sick," Laurel said. "The tuition was the easiest thing to stop paying." Park Ji-won was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "What is your name?" "Laurel." "Laurel Dempsey." "Laurel." Park Ji-won said it as though she were filing it carefully somewhere. "That clause would have cost my company 4 years and considerable money to reverse. Assuming we had caught it at all." She paused. "We might not have caught it." Laurel didn't say anything. "You risked your employment," Park Ji-won said. "For a stranger, in a country that is not mine, you were being deceived," Laurel said. That seemed like the relevant thing. For the first time that evening, Park Ji-won smiled. It was a small smile, but it was genuine, and it changed her face considerably. "I have an office in this city," she said, "on Saint Laurent. We work with 3 provinces and 2 federal contracts. I need someone who understands Canadian business law, speaks both official languages." She glanced at Laurel, and apparently some Korean, and is not afraid to say something uncomfortable at the wrong moment. Laurel looked at her. She was aware that this was the kind of moment that happened in other people's lives. The kind of thing you told other people about over a beer, and said, "Can you believe it?" She was also aware, sitting there in her apron, that she had precisely 3 tables to clear and a closing sidework checklist she had not yet started. "I should tell you," Laurel said, "that I don't have my degree." "I know," Park Ji-won said. "I also don't care. I have plenty of people with degrees." She set her water glass down. "I don't have many people who know what is worth saying when the room is telling them to be quiet." Laurel thought about the invoice on the kitchen table at home. She thought about her grandmother's kitchen, the smell of doenjang jjigae on a Sunday, her grandmother's hands moving through the steam. She thought about 3 years of case law and contract theory, and the precise, airless feeling of the day she'd walked into the registrar's office and asked what withdrawal from the program required. "When would you need me to start?" she said. "January," Park Ji-won said. "That gives you time to arrange your notice here. And—" She reached into her jacket, took out a card, and slid it across the table. "I will have my assistant send you the contact information for our benefits coordinator. Medical coverage begins on the first day of employment." The card was heavier than it looked. Laurel picked it up. "I didn't tell you about my mother," she said carefully. "No." Park Ji-won agreed. "You didn't." A silence. "I had Seong-yun look you up," Park Ji-won said, nodding toward her colleague, who was now off the phone and studiously reading something on his own tablet at a respectful distance. "After you started speaking. While you were translating, you looked me up during the translation?" "I am a fast reader," Park Ji-won said simply. "Your mother is a patient at the Lakeshore General. The GoFundMe page was not hard to find." Laurel looked at the card in her hand. Park Ji-won Enterprises. Below the name, a Seoul address and a Montreal one. Below that, a title, Chairman. Not Managing Director, not VP, Chairman. "I see," Laurel said. "The medical coverage is comprehensive," Park Ji-won said, "including oncology." Thierry Nadeau appeared at the edge of the dining room. He looked at the scene. Server sitting at the guest table, 1 guest remaining, the unmistakable atmosphere of a conversation that had ended several separate negotiations and begun an entirely different one, with the expression of a man deciding very carefully what to do. Park Ji-won looked at him. "Your employee intervened in a business matter tonight," she said pleasantly. "It prevented a fraud. I intend to write to your management to commend her." She paused. "I also intend to book the private dining room for a dinner of 12, 3 weeks from now. The Beausoleil table, obviously, will not be invited." Thierry blinked. Then he nodded. "Of course, Miss Park." He retreated. Laurel looked at the card again. The chandeliers were still doing their expensive best overhead. Outside, through the east window, October was happening to the city. Leaves skating across the pavement on Saint-Denis, a couple walking fast with their collars up. Montreal, doing what Montreal did in autumn, which was to be quietly beautiful in a way that didn't ask for acknowledgement. "I want to ask you something," Laurel said. "Yes. Why didn't you ask for more time when the interpreter didn't arrive? You could have postponed." Park Ji-won was quiet for a moment, "Because Gould assured me it was unnecessary. And she stopped, started again. "I did not want to seem uncertain." "You said that to your colleague," Laurel said. "I heard you, yes." Park Ji-won's voice was even. "I did. It almost cost you a great deal." "It did." Park Ji-won picked up her water glass and then set it down again without drinking. "I have been doing business in countries that are not mine for 22 years. I know what it feels like when someone is trying to move faster than you can follow." She looked at Laurel. "I have learned to trust that feeling. Tonight I did not, and you were the consequence of that mistake." A pause. In the best possible interpretation of that word, Laurel folded the card and put it in the small pocket of her apron, the pocket that usually held her order pad. "I'll call tomorrow," she said. "Good." Park Ji-won stood. She was taller than she'd looked sitting down, which was somehow not surprising. She buttoned one button of her jacket. "The dinner in 3 weeks. Make sure they use the Languedoc glasses. Not the house crystal." "The Gould party used the house crystal, and the shape is wrong for the burgundy I intend to order." "I'll mention it," Laurel said. "Do more than mention it," Park Ji-won said, with the tone of someone who had spent a career not mentioning things. "Tell them." She left without looking back, which Laurel was coming to understand was simply how she moved through the world. Forward, and with a confidence that had nothing to do with arrogance and everything to do with the long practice of trusting her own judgment. Laurel sat at the table for another moment. The last of the chandeliers hummed faintly in the quiet. Somewhere in the kitchen, a pot was being washed, the smell of the evening, burgundy and truffle oil and beeswax candles burning down, was beginning to thin in the air the way the smell of a room does when it knows the important part of the night is over. She had 32 glasses to collect, 6 napkins to fold, and a closing checklist she was now significantly behind on. She stood up. She put on her professional face, the one that meant nothing and gave nothing away, that she had worn for 2 years in this room. Then she took a breath, and for the first time in longer than she could clearly remember, she let herself feel the specific, almost unbearable lightness of knowing that something was about to be different, that the version of her life in which she poured water and did not speak was, without ceremony or announcement, finished. She picked up the water pitcher and began to clear the table. Outside, the city went on being October, and for the first time in a long time, that felt like enough.